Hey guys, Rob Dabney here with ADV Pulse, and today we are riding the 2021 Kawasaki KLX300. Visually, this bike hasn't changed too much since it was first introduced in 2006. They've made a few refinements over the years. They've made some suspension updates. They added a new digital dash and also fuel injection in 2018. What's new for 2021 is they punched out the motor to a 300. They also put a hotter camshaft in there from their KLX300R dirt bike. They made some refinements in the suspension, and it got some slimmer radiators. Basically, the engine now has more power and torque across the RPM range. There's also been some refinements to the engine. They've optimized the ignition timing, added a new engine balancer, and there's also higher gearing now that it can push now that it has more power. That new engine comes with a 6-speed transmission. You also get a 43mm front fork, a fully adjustable rear shock, and the front is adjustable for compression damping only. It rides on a 21-inch front wheel and 18-inch rear wheel. And you also get a 2-gallon fuel tank, and all that weighs up to about 304 pounds fully fueled. Some of that weight is from extensive use of steel on this bike. So you got steel handlebars, steel fuel tank, steel kickstand, pegs. There's a lot of different parts that a magnet's gonna stick to. But that also makes it a really tough bike. As far as electronics on this bike, all you really get is this basic digital dash. It's got a tachometer, speedometer, some warning lights, and a clock. There's no ABS, no traction control, just you, the bike, and your wrist. But again, it's simple, inexpensive, a lot less to go wrong. As far as the ergos, it feels a little bit undersized for me. I'm 6'2", but it's pretty close to a full-size dirt bike. Not like some of these smaller bikes like the XT250 from Yamaha. The bars feel a little bit low, but the knee bend feels perfectly fine sitting down on it for a long time. It's got a fairly tall seat height for shorter riders. We did see some other riders who were in the 5'7" range and lower, struggling a little bit to touch the ground. But do keep in mind that when you sit on this bike, it does sag a fair amount. On the highway, you're not going to get any kind of windscreen to give you any wind protection. There's also no handguards included, so your hands can get a little bit cold on a chilly day. The seat is surprisingly comfortable though. It's fairly wide, and even though it's a flat, long dirt bike style seat. Only gripe I have is this seat strap. They put it right in the middle, so it's really hard to avoid sitting on it. But comes off with a couple bolts if you don't like it. But again, the ergos are great for longer distances. It's really more of the wind protection that's a problem on this bike if you're going to try and take it on the highway for any extensive period of time. As far as how smooth it is, it's actually surprisingly smooth for a single cylinder, smaller displacement motor. I was surprised when I got on it and started cruising at about 70 miles an hour. It's one of the smoother single cylinder engines that I've ridden on. So that's actually a pretty cool thing about this bike. It does have pretty good street manners for a dual sport, and you can comfortably ride on the highway for a fair bit of time. And that's one of the big bonuses of this bike. You don't feel like you're riding a dirt bike on the highway. It does sort of transform more into a street-oriented bike once you're cruising down the road. The power's not that impressive on the highway. You're definitely going to have to look in your rearview mirror if you want to pass and give a good hard look and do a little bit of planning, but it's adequate. You're going to be able to pass cars, big trucks, and get around traffic. The sweet spot cruising down the highway is right around 70. Anything beyond that, you start to feel a little bit more buzz. Now, once you get this bike in the twisties, it's a very light, nimble bike, so it's actually a lot of fun to cruise it around in the turns. You can really accelerate it out of turns and just give it all that throttle, and it's not going to start skipping out on you. It just has a really mellow power hit, so that's nice, especially for a newer rider. It's not very intimidating. It definitely makes it a fun ride more than just, you know, an adrenaline pumping type of riding style. The performance of the brakes is pretty good. It's got a 250 millimeter front rotor, and that thing has a lot of stopping power for the street as well as in the dirt. Now once the road turns to dirt, it's really in its element. It's a nice, nimble machine, and you can ride this thing all day sitting down on it, just kind of picking through the rocks, just at a leisurely pace. It loves doing that kind of riding. It's a fantastic little machine for this type of mountain terrain where you got a lot of rocks, and it excels in that slow to mid-range speeds. It's able to just pick its way through a trail. The suspension is balanced. There's not a lot of dive. The power is tractable. So you can just inch along. And if you want to, if it gets a little bit too rough, just drop down to the seat and just paddle your way through whatever comes up. It just loves the rocky terrain at those slow to mid-range speeds, and that's where this bike shines. For more aggressive riding where you're up on the pegs do feel a little bit small, so standing up all day, you know, your feet could get a little bit sore with these. So adding a platform peg might be something that would be a nice upgrade for this bike. The bars are a little bit lower, so when you're trying to jam through bigger rocks at higher speeds, a guy my size, a little bit hunched over a little bit too much. But for anybody in that 5'8" to 6 foot range, it probably feels right about perfect. As far as the suspension, it's actually a really good suspension for a bike in this price range. It has full adjustability on the rear shock and compression damping on the forks, so you can really tune it to the different terrain that you're trying to do. You know, I wouldn't hesitate to go out with KTMs and Husqvarnas on this bike for a day of riding, and it'll definitely get the job done. You might just be hanging out in the back of the pack a little bit. Where I notice it does have some limitations is more of that desert terrain. If you're doing more high speed, whooped out, big hit type of riding, that's when the suspension does get a little bit overwhelmed. I did get a little bit of a bottoming here and there on the rear shock. And with this suspension, it's got an extra inch in the front than it does in the back, and there was definitely times when I wished it had an extra inch in the back as well. But it's actually not bad if you're keeping the pace down a little bit, but if you start to push it too hard, that's when it starts to get a little bit overwhelmed, and you can kind of tell the bike wants you to back off a bit. Another area where this bike might have a few limitations is if you're taking it out to some big sand dunes where you really need that power to kind of get it all the way up that hill. The 300 motor definitely puts out good tractable power that'll get you up most hills, but the gearing is a little bit street oriented now, and on steeper, rockier terrain, when you kind of want to be in second gear, cruising along at a lower RPM, it had some problems, especially when I got up in the higher elevations, holding that second gear. But you can still just drop it down into first and still make it up those hills. But if you're the type of rider who's just looking to go out and cruise around and explore trails and every once in a while push the pace, then this bike is definitely going to get it done for you. Overall, this bike, I think it's a big improvement with the 300 compared to the 250. It gives it a little more fun factor. You know, the acceleration's a little bit better, and it can pull harder up those hills, and there's less shifting, and the power is better throughout the RPM range. But it's also still an unintimidating power, which is nice for newer riders or people that are just not out there trying to race. It just comes on nice and smooth and hooks up well. So that's a very nice characteristic of this bike. Another standout feature is definitely the suspension, especially in this price range. It can handle some rougher terrain, and it's got full adjustability in the rear, compression damping in the front, so you can really fine-tune it to different terrain that you're riding. I also like the fact that it's pretty smooth for a single on the highway. That just gives it some extra versatility so that you can use it to commute to work, you know, run errands around town, and at the same time, if you're living far away from the trails, you can ride within an hour to the trails, go get in some good dirt riding, and then ride home on this bike. There's definitely some potential to turn this into a light ADV bike as well. As you can see, we've got some smaller bags on here, and this is kind of a setup for a day ride or an overnighter at a hotel, but you know, put a rack on it and you could carry all your camping gear. Definitely be nice to throw on a windscreen if you're going to be doing any highway mileage. But the only place I think this bike missed the mark a bit is just with the smaller tank. It's only 2 gallons, and if you're riding it more aggressively, you don't have much more than maybe 90 miles of range with this bike. So that definitely needs to be upgraded to a larger tank. Also, the trail protection it's decent for a stock bike, but the stock skid plate that goes underneath doesn't have a whole lot of coverage, and it also doesn't come with any handguards. But luckily, there's plenty of aftermarket support for this bike since it's been around since 2006. So there's plenty of products out there if you want to upgrade it. Another thing which would be nice on this bike would be switchable ABS, or a version that has ABS that you could buy. I know that a lot of riders out there would really appreciate having that ABS just as a safety net on the street, especially newer riders who are just getting into the sport. So that'd be a nice option to include in a future version of this bike. But with that 300 motor, it's going to be able to carry that weight better from all the luggage and the additional equipment. This bike also has a 7,500 mile maintenance interval, which is pretty good for a small dual sport like this. A lot of the other performance dual sports, it's about 1,500 miles or less. So you could go on longer trips on this bike and not have to worry about changing the oil or checking the valves. And this thing be great, you know, for just getting out there and camping out in remote areas. Obviously, it is going to lean more towards the dirt. And if you're looking for more of an adventure bike and you're going longer miles on the highway, then there may be some better options for you there. But as far as dirt-oriented dual sports, you're looking for something simple, dead reliable, and durable. You know, if you're going to get out in rougher terrain, it's got the suspension to do it, it's got the ground clearance to do it, and it's fairly light and maneuverable, and you can do it without having to worry too much about it. It has no electronics, less to go wrong, just a dead simple bike that's going to get you there and back home. So what you get is a fun, approachable, and solidly built bike here that's going to be unintimidating for new riders, but at the same time, from what we've heard from Kawasaki, a lot of really experienced riders end up buying this bike just because it does have some performance reserve, and a lot of guys are just not looking for that adrenaline pumping machine. You know, they're not looking to just go out and bang whoops all day and hit the rocks. You know, they just want to go out and explore and cruise around, and every once in a while go out and have more aggressive ride with their buddies. But this is the kind of bike that would be perfect as a second bike to have in the garage. If a friend's in town, if you're on a more expensive performance dual sport, you know, they'll still be able to ride and have a great time. So be a great bike if you have a teenager that you want to teach how to ride, because the power is just very mellow and it's easy to control. So you could teach someone how to ride on this bike, and it'd be a while before they really outgrew it. So it's a great bike for new riders, but also there's something in reserve for more experienced riders as well. The KLX300 is available on US showroom floors in lime green for $5,599 and in camo for $5,799. And if you want to get the full review on this bike, you can check it out on advpulse.com. If you like videos like this, hit the subscribe button and also hit that little bell icon next to it and you'll get notifications when we upload new videos. Thanks for watching.